For years, fans believed that Denver and Glen Campbell were friendly peers, country pop trailblazers who shared the spotlight and respected each other's success. The two men even sang together, laughed together on camera, and were often lumped together as part of the 1970s crossover boom. But what audiences didn't know is that beneath Denver's signature grin was something cold, something deeply personal. John Denver, the clean-cut, mountain-loving troubadour, wasn't one for public spats or tabloid drama. His brand was kindness, optimism, and peace. But even the most peace-loving soul can harbor disdain, especially when it comes to someone like Glen Campbell. According to whispers from industry insiders and old-school tour managers, there was tension between the two legends from the moment their careers overlapped. And it wasn't just professional rivalry, it was philosophical warfare. When Denver and Campbell performed a duet on the 1977 Thank God, I'm a Country Boy TV special, audiences saw what looked like harmony. Two stars joining forces for a feel-good moment. But behind the scenes, things were very different. Reports suggest that Denver kept to himself during rehearsals, barely exchanging word with Campbell except when the cameras were rolling. He arrived late, left early, and refused to engage offstage. It wasn't a clash of egos. It was something deeper. Denver reportedly believed Campbell's entire image was a lie. Where Denver poured his heart into songwriting and activism, Campbell wore a rhinestone smile and played the industry game. Denver couldn't stand it. He saw Campbell as the embodiment of the music machine he despised, a man more interested in image and business than art and truth. Some studio techs who worked with both men during the 1970s said you could feel the ice in the room when they were near each other. Denver, a man who normally lit up any space with his calm warmth, would go stone-faced when Campbell's name came up. One engineer remembered an awkward moment during a planning meeting for a joint performance when Denver simply said, "As long as he doesn't talk politics or pretend he's one of us, we'll get through it." And perhaps most telling of all, despite crossing paths many times, the two never collaborated on a full album, never toured together, and never once spoke about each other in depth during interviews. Even when journalists asked directly, both gave polite, generic answers. The truth was buried under a layer of professionalism and carefully managed PR. Denver never made his dislike public, but those close to him didn't need him to. The way he pulled away from Campbell offstage, the way his tone changed when name came up, the way he quietly dodged collaborative opportunities, it all said what he wouldn't. He didn't like Glen Campbell. He tolerated him. He performed beside him. But behind the smile, Denver had already turned his back. John Denver and Glen Campbell weren't just two different men. They were two different worlds. At first glance, both were clean-cut, guitar-slinging American icons with chart-topping hits and TV smiles. But scratch the surface, and it's clear why Denver could never truly stomach Campbell. Their values, their approach to music, and the very souls of their careers were completely misaligned. John Denver wasn't in it for the glitz. Born Henry John Duchendor Jr., he spent his life chasing meaning. His music was personal, almost painfully so. He sang about nature, humanity, vulnerability, and the aching desire for peace in a fractured world. Songs like Rocky Mountain High and Sunshine on My Shoulders weren't just hits. They were hymns of a man searching for spiritual truth in an increasingly plastic culture. Glen Campbell? He was the plastic culture. At least, that's how Denver saw it. Campbell, a supremely talented guitarist and former member of the Wrecking Crew, had the chops, but also the polish. His music was clean, commercial, and made for mainstream America. Hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Southern Nights were catchy and well-crafted. But to purists like Denver, they rang hollow. Slick tunes from a man who played the part of the country star perfectly but said little substance. Denver didn't hide his contempt for that kind of approach. Though he never named names, he often criticized the entertainment machine that, in his view, stripped music of its soul. His disdain for the corporate-controlled country and pop music was well documented. He believed in music with a message. For Denver, art wasn't about fame, it was about integrity. And that's exactly where Campbell fit in, on the wrong side of the fence. Where Denver championed environmentalism, Campbell performed at conservative political events. Where Denver rallied for global peace, Campbell sang feel-good hits for network specials. And while Denver turned down roles and endorsements that didn't align with his values, Campbell embraced TV with open arms, hosting the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour and appearing in countless commercials. To Denver, it was inauthentic. Campbell, he believed, was everything wrong with the industry. Flash over feeling, charm over challenge. The rhinestone suits, the Vegas-style production, the country music industry stamp of approval. It was all a glittery show. And yet, that show kept winning. Campbell was beloved by the Nashville elite. He was safe, profitable, and adored by millions. Meanwhile, Denver, despite massive popularity, was often seen as an outsider, a folk guy who had wandered into the wrong genre. When Denver won CMA Entertainer of the Year in 1975, the country establishment practically revolted. It was a moment that reinforced everything Denver already knew. The industry didn't want his kind. They wanted more Campbells. So yes, the tension between them was real. It wasn't loud and it wasn't public, but it was philosophical warfare. One man stood for soul-searching, the other for stardom. And John Denver? He never forgave Glen Campbell for choosing the wrong side. By the mid-1970s, country music was no longer just fiddles and twang. It had become a battleground, a cultural, political, and artistic war zone. At the center of that clash, two icons with very different visions, Glen Campbell and John Denver. And while neither man ever threw a punch or flung public insults, make no mistake, their egos collided behind the scenes in ways fans never fully realized. This wasn't just about music. It was about identity. Glen Campbell was Nashville's golden boy. He'd come up through the ranks, earned respect as a session player, and eventually became the face of mainstream country music on television. He had the charm, the accent, the approval of the Grand Ole Opry crowd. To the old guard, Campbell was the embodiment of tradition with just enough pop gloss to reach the suburbs. Then came John Denver. To Campbell's camp, Denver was a threat, an outsider with a pretty face, a guitar, and a knack for folk pop ballads that somehow got him labeled country. He didn't pay his dues in Nashville. He didn't speak with a southern drawl. He wasn't one of them. And yet, by 1975, Denver was on top of the world. He had multiple #1 hits, sold-out tours, and millions of fans who adored his message of love, peace, and environmental harmony. The tipping point came that same year, when Denver was named the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year, a move that sent shockwaves through the industry. While many artists politely clapped, others seethed. Charlie Rich, who won the award the previous year, famously set the announcement envelope on fire on live television. But behind the curtain, many suspected that Glen Campbell, too, was less than thrilled. Though he didn't throw tantrums or burn envelopes, those close to Campbell say he found Denver's rise confusing at best and insulting at worst. For someone who worked tirelessly to build respect in Nashville, watching a folk pop singer take the crown felt like a slap in the face. And Denver knew it. He reportedly hated the politics of the industry. And Campbell, whether he meant to or not, became the face of those politics. Denver couldn't stomach the backslapping, the label deals, the quiet alliances that ruled the CMA voting bloc. He felt boxed out, even while on top, and many believe he blamed Campbell, directly or indirectly, for being the safe, industry-favored king of country. It didn't help that both men were massive stars competing for the same audience. Radio only had so many slots. TV specials only had so many headline spots. Award shows could only pick one name. The smiles they gave each other in public masked the quiet, burning truth. They were rivals in every sense of the word, philosophically, musically, and culturally. And when two massive egos occupy the same space, one of them has to yield. Denver never would, and Campbell never thought he should. When John Denver died in a tragic plane crash off the California coast on October 12, 1997, the world mourned. Fans lit candles, Radio stations played his greatest hits on repeat, and tributes poured in from fellow musicians across the spectrum. But one tribute stood out, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. Glen Campbell, ever the polished professional, released a short statement. He called Denver a great talent, mentioned how their paths had crossed many times, and offered condolences to his family. On paper, it was respectful, but for fans and insiders who remember the quiet tension between the two men, the tone felt hollow. There were no personal anecdotes, no emotional memories, no stories of friendship. It was a sanitized, calculated farewell from a man who clearly didn't want to say much at all. Why the cold shoulder in death? Why no heartfelt public moment from Campbell, who had hosted a national television show, played for presidents, and certainly knew how to deliver a moving tribute if he wanted to, because, as many believe, he didn't want to lie. Sources close to Campbell later hinted that he found Denver difficult to relate to. He didn't understand the folk singer's intense environmentalism, his political soapboxing, or his open critique of the country music machine that Campbell himself had thrived within. Privately, he reportedly referred to Denver as too sensitive and too self-righteous. For Campbell, who had fought his own demons, alcohol, fame, public scandal, the idea of a clean-cut idealist like Denver pointing fingers from a mountaintop rubbed him the wrong way. He respected Denver's talent, sure, but admire him as a man? That's a different story. And the feeling was mutual. Denver never attacked Campbell publicly, but he didn't need to. In interviews, when asked about the state of country music, Denver would often go on passionate rants about how commercial it had become. "We've lost the poetry," he once said. "It's all been turned into business." He never named names, but anyone paying attention could see where the arrows were pointing. Campbell represented the polished product. Clean, commercial, profitable. Denver was trying to be the conscience of the genre, something Campbell likely found pretentious. So when Denver died, Campbell offered the only thing he could: a polite, distant goodbye. No tribute concert, no duet re-releases, no heartfelt stage performance, just a press release and silence. To many fans, this lack of emotional reaction was a final confirmation. These two men had never been friends, not really. Their smiles were for the cameras. Their duets were contractual. Their respect was professional, not personal. And when the moment came for one to truly honor the other, the distance between them became undeniable. In the end, Campbell's tribute didn't just honor Denver. It revealed the truth about their relationship, the awkward silences, the philosophical divide, the decades of mutual coldness. It all culminated in a final farewell that said more through restraint than words ever could. So after years of rumors, tension, and icy smiles, the question still burns. Why did John Denver utterly hate Glen Campbell? What was it that made a man known for peace, love, and harmony go cold the moment Campbell's name came up? It wasn't jealousy. Denver had more than enough success of his own. It wasn't about a specific argument, either. According to those who knew him, Denver's resentment toward Campbell wasn't triggered by any one explosive incident. It was a slow burn, fueled by something deeper, something Denver never said aloud, but always carried in his posture, his tone, his carefully chosen words. The real reason? John Denver didn't believe Glen Campbell had a soul. Not literally, of course, but to Denver, Campbell represented a kind of artificiality that bordered on spiritual fraud. Denver, a man who wrote songs about the Rockies with tears in his eyes, who flew himself to the clouds to feel free, who stood on stage not to be a star but to connect with something greater. He saw in Campbell the opposite, a performer, a salesman, a showman with a rhinestone smile, and a heart locked behind industry polish. Denver resented what Campbell stood for more than who he was. Glen Campbell, to many, was country music's smiling ambassador to the mainstream. To Denver, that made him the gatekeeper of a broken system. Campbell played nice with the suits, said the right things, smiled for the cameras, and made peace with the powers that be. Denver didn't want peace. He wanted truth. He wanted revolution. He wanted art to shake people awake. And Campbell? He just wanted to sing a good song and go home. It's easy to label this as ego versus ego, but it ran deeper than that. Denver hated being boxed into labels, genres, and business deals. He famously fought with record executives over the direction of his albums. He testified before Congress about censorship and environmental policy. He put his values above his sales numbers. Campbell? He stayed the course. Didn't rock the boat. Didn't push too hard. And to Denver, that wasn't just weak, it was unforgivable. There's also the matter of authenticity. Denver lived his lyrics. He built a cabin in Colorado. He wrote about the mountains and then climbed them. He wrote about flying and then became a pilot. His music was autobiography. Campbell? He didn't write most of his biggest hits. And while he played the part of the country cowboy perfectly, his background was as much Hollywood as it was Arkansas. To Denver, that disconnect between image and reality was the ultimate betrayal. In the end, it wasn't about who sold more records or who got more applause. It was about what each man believed music was for. Campbell used it to entertain. Denver used it to awaken. And in Denver's eyes, Campbell's brand of music put the world to sleep. So no, Denver never stood on a stage and said, "I hate Glen Campbell." But he didn't need to. Every silence, every dodge collaboration, every clipped interview answer spoke louder than words. And now we finally understand why.